What is a property title in real estate? Property is an item that can be owned by a person or an entity. The item owned can be tangible, which means that it can be physically held or touched, or intangible, which includes items such as ideas, music, and images. Ownership of any property grants the ability to use, sell, and transfer that property, so it is important to have proof of ownership. This is where a property title is important. A property title is the basis of ownership and the absolute rights that it conveys. It is separate from possession, as property can be possessed or currently held by someone who is not the legal owner of that property. As an example, a new teenage driver may have possession of a car because they are physically driving it, but their parent is the title holder to the car. The title allows them to grant or revoke access to that property as they see fit. Land ownership is a form of property ownership in which the holder of that land may do as they see fit with the property. They may add buildings or other improvements to the land, and they also have the rights of ownership to whatever is below the surface of the land as well as the air above. A real estate title is the recognition of land ownership. For those who have bought a house, a home title is transferred upon the sale of property. The holders of land or home titles are recognized as the owners and given full legal ownership rights to that property. Deeds versus titles. The difference between a title and a deed is tangibility. A property deed is the legal document that grants ownership of that property to the holder. The deed conveys the title of the property to an owner and is recorded wherever local property records are maintained. A title is the concept of property ownership and does not physically exist, which is why a deed is used to record the title. In the context of home ownership and house titles, when a house is purchased, the transfer of the title for the house is recorded via the deed to the house. Title search and title insurance. When real estate is being purchased, part of the due diligence process of securing the property is to perform a title search. This is done to ensure that there are no previous ownership disputes that may not have been resolved. Ideally, the title for property is owned without any issues, but if a property has existed for a long enough time, there could possibly be history that was not recorded properly at some point. If the title is deemed to be whole and without issue, the purchaser of the property will still get title insurance. This is additional security for a property owner in case the title search company misses an issue in their initial search. The insurance will help to cover the costs of resolving any ownership disputes. Types of property titles. Titles declare who has the legal rights of ownership to a property. Since this is absolute ownership, which means that there are no conditions or exceptions to the rights of ownership, there are different types of real estate titles to specify the exact owners. The following will explain these types of titles. Joint tenancy. This is a form of title where generally two people hold an equal share of ownership. A married couple buying a house would most likely hold a joint tenancy title, which declares both partners to be equal owners. If one spouse passes away, the title would make the surviving spouse the sole owner of the property. Sole ownership. Property with a single owner is classified as sole ownership. It is a very simple ownership method due to the fact that there are no extra parties who would have an interest in the property. Tenancy in common, where joint tenancy designates how ownership would work should one of the joint owners pass away. Tenancy in common is another form of deciding the transfer of ownership upon the passing of an owner. This type of title is useful for property that is owned by unrelated parties or family members who are not immediate to each other, such as cousins who are a generation removed from the original owners. Tenants by entirety. This is also a form of joint tenancy that is exclusive to married couples. It essentially gives the same rights as a joint tenancy, but no decisions about the property may be made without the consent of the spouse. Community property. Another form of title that applies to marriage. Community property declares that all property acquired by either person during their marriage is deemed to be equally owned by both. This disregards if one spouse earns more money than the other and decides that any property title acquired by a spouse is also the other person's by default. Examples of real estate titles. The following are some examples regarding real estate titles and how they may be used. A married couple purchases a house together. It will be the house in which they decide to raise a family. They have a tenancy by entirety title, which essentially ensures that the house will always belong to them until they decide to sell or the final spouse passes away and the property is transferred to Their children. A farm has been in possession of 3 generations of a family. The ownership of the property is split 6 ways evenly among the siblings and cousins. The type of title is tenancy in common, as it allows each individual owner of a share of the property to continue to pass their share of property ownership to the next generation. Real estate development companies can be the sole owners of the properties they hold, as this allows for a simple definition of who has the rights of ownership. This can allow for that company to allow tenants and decide how the property will be managed, such as in an office building or retail center.